Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. Head on over to FanDuel.com/Bet the Board. Download the app. Take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses that are available to you. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, here for College Football Championship Week. I don't have to remember the number. Joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider.
Big day for college football. Early signing day. We got championship week going on. And this, sadly, is our last standalone college football podcast of the season.
Are you truly sad about that, or are you just feigning that level of remorse, grieving for the loss of college football? I'm not quite sure what the best word I should use in this particular instance is.
I'm going to plead the fifth.
Okay, that's fair. I respect that. I'm not going to lie. But you know what the unique part about this, Payne? In a normal season, your Florida State Seminoles would not be playing on Championship Saturday. Instead, they do have a game to preoccupy you should you not want to watch any of the power programs actually playing for a spot in the college football playoff.
Well, thank God we have some real football Saturday with the NFL going on. But
Well,
you're
I
right.
mean-
We got some big championship games. Some of them look pretty good. We're going to break down 6 of them, widening our coverage. So I think everything's heading in the right direction this week.
When you sit in the Payne Insider home corporate offices, I mean, will you have sound on your NFL games first and foremost once those two kick off? Or is there a chance that college football can get center stage in some capacity?
I typically don't have sound on my television very often.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That makes you a savage, I think, in the grand scheme of things. I think our
Really?
listeners out there are going, man. Well, I mean, not in all
It's
the
tough
time.
to have
Obviously, when you have
them-
four...
Yeah, all the
No.
games
You
going at once.
Yeah, I mean, you got to mix it up here and there. You every now and again, when you're watching 37 games at once, you do want a little bit of color commentary, add some perspective. But I can
usually
understand
just makes
where...
me more frustrated. So
Well,
I'm not
yeah, I
quite
mean, that's
sure
a given.
they know what's going on.
Well, I mean, I can understand where you're coming from completely on that particular side. You know what game, Payne, though, I know won't have sound and probably won't even get on your TVs? The Pac-12 championship on Friday night.
I can't believe you're making me break this down. What's wild about this is, like, USC is one of the most overrated teams in the country. Kind of a fraud. So much so,
That
like,
is
the loyalists don't even think Clay Helton deserves this job. And they could be 6-0 with the conference championship by Friday night. So
I mean, that was kind of my running joke on social. All these close wins for USC, all they're doing is delaying the inevitable and giving the administration a chance to retain Clay Helton, saying, look, he won us a conference championship. We don't have to go out there and get a new head coach. But at the same time, who knows? Urban Meyer spurns all the folks in lovely Austin. So maybe they'll make a push for Urban, even if Clay Helton were to bring a conference title back to the Coliseum.
USC right now is being held together by Keaton Slovis and Graham Harrell. Once Keaton Slovis moves on, like, could be an ugly scene there. But it would be fun, right?
At a high level.
Bring in old Urban, have him bring in 2 of his colleagues there. Maybe have Matt Leinart coach the quarterbacks, Reggie Bush the running backs. Get it rolling there again.
We'll see. We'll see if the men of
Bring in
Troy
Lori
can
Loughlin as she can help with academics. And then
You wonder, Lori might make an excellent bagman in the grand scheme of things. You never know exactly how that all works to try and build out the network. So
Urban's
she's
got that
clearly got
covered.
soldiers on the ground.
Urban's got that covered.
When you look at this game Friday night, of course, you'll be able to watch it on Fox to kick off championship weekend. USC, we're going to call them a 3-point favorite. No knock on FanDuel Sportsbook, but 2.5 minus $1.30. That's pretty much 3 in our world. Total on this game sits at 62.5. Of course, Oregon into this game because Washington fell below the minimum of scholarship requirements at 53 players. The interesting part about it is that Washington, despite a better record, would have found themselves as a full touchdown underdog compared to where the market currently sits here. When you look at Oregon, they beat USC a season ago, albeit with Justin Herbert manning the helm 56-24. USC players have been pretty outspoken about trying to avenge that loss. And for those folks who don't follow Pac-12 football inside and out, this game has massive recruiting implications as well. Oregon has kind of become the top dog in the conference, number 1 overall. You look at USC, number 2, and Oregon's done a lot of their heavy lifting through Southern California, taking away recruits at the Trojans' expense. But Payne, as we look at this particular football game, you mentioned Keaton Slovis and his talented receivers. We know what Tyler Vaughns did on Saturday night. We know what Amon St. Brown is capable of doing as well opposite him. And USC's offense is going to have a good amount of success against that Oregon defense. But I think for our purposes, the matchup worth really focusing on is USC's ability or inability to stop the Oregon run attack, as USC has pretty much been run on by all of their opponents, allowing 119 yards or more in 4 games, 158 plus yards in 3 games, and north of 185 yards in 2 games. Oregon a little bit of extra time to prepare. Can the Ducks find success on the ground to keep that USC high-powered offense grounded?
Well, let me ask you a question here. If you're a player in Oregon, are you accepting this conference title if you win it?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Because the reason I say that is because we didn't have a chance to play Washington, which was a de facto play-in game for the conference title.
Gotcha. Okay. So, you hit this on the head. It's going to be difficult, I think, for either team to get a bunch of stops. But the biggest factor for us is USC's run defense, because they're going to have to figure out a way to stop the Ducks' ground game. Oregon will probably be able to dictate the flow if they can run. And there's a reason that we have seen some money trickle in on Oregon, because if you can get a dog that can run the football and dictate the pace and the tempo and the flow, it can really go a long way. Mario Cristobal said all the right things this week. I can't believe I did this, but I did. I went and listened to his presser.
You're a brave man.
I think he adjusts his piece of paper about 74 times within these pressers. It's pretty funny. But he claims that these guys are juiced up about being in this game, and that he's heard all the outside noise from guys like us saying they probably don't belong with an opportunity to win a college or a conference championship here. So they're going to be motivated. Getting back to this matchup, Oregon's had real success all season long running the football. I know Verdell probably hasn't been playing to the level we expected him to, but Dye's been pretty good. Then you have this ability with a mobile quarterback like Shuck to create that extra man advantage in the box. And you're looking in totality, the Ducks right now 5th in rushing success rate, 3rd in explosive runs. Even with Sewell, the Ducks' best O-lineman, opting out, who's going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, Oregon's done a pretty good job getting some push up front with their O-line as well. In the area where USC is just extremely weak and has been really for 2 seasons, and we touched on this last week against UCLA as well, it's that defensive front. They struggle to stop the run. They are really unwilling to consistently set the edge. The guys along that Trojan defensive line lose their gap integrity pretty frequently. They don't fill the right gaps. They don't play as one. And we mentioned last week, they play like a bunch of individuals that are trying to make plays, so you will get the occasional run stuff or the havoc play behind the line of scrimmage. And if you look at the metrics, top 35 in both those things, stuffing runs and havoc. But down to down, USC's not consistent enough. They lack discipline, and that leads to these explosive runs, because right now, 53rd in the country in rushing success rate allowed, but 109th in explosive runs. And the one team this season that USC has really struggled with, it's been a couple teams, but they trailed by 2 scores at home before pulling off that miracle comeback that included an onside kick. That team also had a mobile quarterback. It was Arizona State. Jaden Daniels had over 100 rushing yards, averaged 10 yards a carry. Tyler Shuck and the Ducks quarterback, I think he is a real dual threat here. The first one that USC has faced since Daniels. So that's the biggest factor to me in this. I think you agree. If USC's run defense shows up, they're Pac-12 champs. If Cristobal's O-line eats up that Trojans D-line and the Ducks can run with their, let's call it a three-headed attack, and they're able to dictate the style of this game, Oregon's going to pull off the upset, and the pros that have taken Oregon early in this week are going to end up cashing a ticket.
Yeah, it's been interesting when you watch USC and how they've been handled in the betting market. We can hit the rewind button and know they were bet against a couple weeks ago against Washington State. I believe that number went from 14 to 11. Last weekend, you had pretty good two-way betting. There was just an avalanche of public support on SC, meaning the market couldn't hold them as a 2.5 or 3-point underdog, with that number ultimately getting to 3.5. And for anybody that watched that game, or even for those that didn't, I mean, UCLA up 18 points, USC's largest comeback in a handful of seasons. They were plus 220 on the money line just to win that game. And the improbable sequence of events it took for them to ultimately get to the window as short road favorites. But when you look at this Oregon attack, I mean, you're spot on. The other thing that's really plagued the Ducks that they're going to have to clamp down on this week, part of the reason this team is only 3-2, despite some of their efficiency numbers that suggest they should have a better overall record, they're -8 in the turnover department. They have to protect the football when they're on the road in this spot. That pretty much contributed to UCLA's undoing last week, since Dorian Thompson-Robinson wasn't throwing incompletions. He just happened to throw 2 passes to players wearing the wrong colored jersey.
That was something we outlined last week about that, is that UCLA is, one, going to have to run the ball, but when DTR does drop back to pass, he's been a little bit efficient, but the completion percentage isn't there. He's not the most accurate guy, just don't throw it to the other team. And sure enough, that's ultimately what was the Bruins' undoing. That was an interesting game. There was a little bit of a battle there on that game. There was 3.5 early in the week, got sent down to 2.5, then came back to 3 with a differing opinion. The public sent it to 3.5, and then there was a couple nibbles right before that game started from some pros on UCLA that I know. And boy, what a way to go down.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a bad beat in terms of college. There's no doubt about that, especially given some of the results we've seen over the last 48 hours in the National Football League as well. One thing I did want to ask you about this particular game, Payne, and you're much better assessing talent in terms of how it'll translate to the next level. You've watched Keaton Slovis. Do you think he has a future as a franchise quarterback in the National Football League, or do you think at best he can be a number 2 on a roster ultimately when his time comes to get drafted?
He's got all the talent in the world, right? He's got the size, the stature, the massive arm, and it's someone that we pinpointed last year and talked up a bunch before people were a little unsure of what he was. Graham Harrell talks about him glowingly, and I really respect Graham Harrell as an offensive mind, so I think he's going to have a shot. But when you talk about franchise quarterbacks, how many of them really are there, even at the NFL level? How many guys are you confident in saying this is our franchise quarterback? I would say maybe 10 in the NFL. So it's tough to make that push and call him a franchise NFL quarterback, but I certainly think he's got all the tools to have a shot to be a starter in that league.
Going to be interesting because obviously he's still extremely young. He'll be back on campus. We'll see what SC ultimately elects to do with their coaching staff. You'd have to think you'll do anything you can to retain Graham Harrell. The receiving talent speaks for itself. So very curious to see how USC handles the bright lights when they take on the Ducks Friday night, if they're able to bring a conference championship back to Southern California. From Friday's games, Payne, we trend into Saturday, and the Big Ten, typically in prime time on Saturday night, well, they're going to get an early kickoff in Indianapolis, 12 Eastern for this one. It's the Buckeyes, a 20.5-point favorite, now firmly in control, or at least we think of their playoff destiny. Total in this game, 56.5, as they'll take on the Northwestern Wildcats. Of course, those numbers always courtesy of FanDuel Sportsbook. When you look at the matchup between these two teams last year, Ohio State 52-3 over the Northwestern Wildcats in Evanston. 2018, these two teams met in the conference championship, a game the Buckeyes won 45-24, covering that number with the game going over the total. Northwestern allowed more than 600 yards, did happen to gain more than 400 yards on their own. Northwestern, what they want to do offensively, no mystery to anyone. They want to try and take the air out of the ball. They want to establish the ground and pound attack to keep the opposing offenses on the sidelines. I have to think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that Ohio State, from an offensive talent standpoint, the overall level of athletes, skill position-wise, they're going to have an edge against every defense in the league, even one as talented as Northwestern. So when you begin to break this game down, Payne, I think it boils down to one matchup that's worth watching, and that would be Northwestern's ability to attack what we feel is the weakest element of this Ohio State defense, which is their secondary. But let's not kid ourselves. Northwestern doesn't exactly have guys that are going to be round one wide receivers or tight ends going up against the Scarlet and Gray stop unit.
So, let me start with where you were taking this initially. And I believe a lot of people are looking forward to the matchup between Ohio State's offense and Northwestern's defense. And I get it. It's like these two units are both in their respective side of the ball, number 2 in offensive efficiency and number 2 in defensive efficiency, top 10 in offensive and defensive success rate. That side of the ball is great on great. And I kind of went down a little bit of a wormhole this morning. We weren't going to talk about it, but found an article, talked to someone who's a little bit better than I am schematically, and sent him the article. And he goes, yeah, that's exactly what I saw. So last year in this game, you kind of mentioned how Ohio State was able to run the ball all over Northwestern. The one thing that I have seen from Northwestern's DC, Mike Hankwitz, is in 2018, he gave Ohio State's offense trouble because he has these players that just have ridiculous IQ. Northwestern's defense basically plays with 2 deep safeties, and it looks like zone pre-snap, then it turns into man coverage post-snap. And if it's a run play, one of Northwestern's safeties basically reads tight end, and if that tight end turns into a blocker, the safety crashes down in support. If not, he hangs back and helps in coverage. So it's really fun to watch, but it looked like last year Ryan Day was smart enough to figure out how to camouflage the tight end and make it look like pass when really it was going to be run, and that's why they were able to run all over Northwestern last season. And you kind of hit us. Like, my gut says Ohio State's able to move the ball here, right? Based on Ryan Day being brilliant and the overwhelming talent and speed edge Ohio State has on what's going to be a ridiculously fast surface. So for me, you hit this perfectly. It's like Northwestern's going to have to be able to score enough here to have a chance. The total is coming down. It says Northwestern's defense hangs tough. Very possible, because I don't think Ohio State's offense is built like it was last season. You lost some O-linemen. You lost some key running backs. I don't think it's as dynamic. I don't think it's as balanced. So the total coming down would indicate Northwestern at least is able to contain. And I think that's probably a requirement if you're going to try to cover 21. But to have a real chance at winning this game, Northwestern's got to make plays through the air. And I think you hit this perfectly. It's that, like, are the Wildcat receivers good enough? Certainly
Peyton Ramsey, baby. Get on board the Peyton Ramsey train, Payne. It's not too late before it leaves the station.
I was on it before anybody, and I think I probably hyped it up a little bit too much early in the season. I was texting you, I'm like, these guys are like number 1 in EPA offense. This team's going to be electric this season. So
yeah, electric's all relative when you're wearing the purple and black. It's all relative for that program.
It is. So the strength of Northwestern's offense is obviously the passing game. The weakness of Ohio State is their pass defense, and it's by a long mile. Northwestern's hovering around the top 50 in both passing success rate and passing EPA per play. They've played a fairly average schedule of passing defenses, but when you look at Ohio State defensively, 56th in passing success rate allowed, 63rd in explosive pass defense, 43rd in EPA pass defense. And it's really important to mention that those poor Ohio State pass defense metrics, they come against one of the most laughable schedules in the entire country. Ohio State has not faced a single offense that's top 50 in passing EPA, okay? In 5 games, Ohio State's opponents have an average EPA pass rank of 83rd. The other thing worth mentioning is that obviously plays a vital role in passing the football is protection. Ohio State defensively and Northwestern offensively in terms of pass protection are almost mirror images. Ohio State, despite losing like gobs of talent along the defensive line, they're 11th in passing down sack rate. So in known passing situations, they've done a good job getting the quarterback. Northwestern, 7th in passing down sack rate allowed. So the O-line, when they have a chance to kind of get out quick, they do pretty well, keeping Ramsey upright. So I think those are the keys to this, being able to pass the ball. What's odd, though, right? I think we both know when you watch these games, when you look at the talent out wide, Indiana has far more talent out wide than Northwestern does. But metrically speaking, as an entire pass offense, the numbers say Northwestern's a better pass offense than Indiana. We will have to see that unfold on Saturday, but that is the way that Northwestern will have a chance to not only stay within this number, but potentially try to win it outright. The other thing that is interesting is where the two offensive lines are weakness, right? Like where Northwestern's offensive line is weak, where Ohio State's defensive line has been weak, is getting pressure on standard downs. So something's going to have to give there. Maybe you have an anomaly type performance, and I think whoever is able to generate some pressure or prevent pressure on those standard downs, first and second down, when it isn't this known passing situation, probably goes a long way here, because if you can get Northwestern backed up a little bit, it might help negate that weakness Ohio State does have in their secondary.
You mentioned the total coming down a tick. We did see this number open as low as 19.5 in some spots, 20.5 more or less the consensus, right where the price sits at FanDuel right now. Do we anticipate this number getting to 3 full touchdowns? And I guess the $100 million question, the reason I was scratching my head, why not just open this game at 21 and see where the betting market takes you, more so than opening in that no man's land in that 19.5, 20 range? That was, I found, as fascinating as anything else, knowing the public's infatuation with Ohio State and the concentration of betting volume you're going to see on a game of this magnitude.
What's really interesting is for the last 2 seasons, let's call it, we have seen professionals have no problem get out and lay it with Ohio State. We actually saw some pro bettors get out and lay it with Ohio State against Indiana, trying to cover that big number. What I have seen so far, and I'm not saying that this is going to be the end-all be-all, but my understanding was at 21, my guys value bet Northwestern. So it's the reason it's down to 20 now pretty much across the board. And there was some flicker of 19.5 before it ultimately had a difference of opinion. And then when it got back to 21, there was another value bet, and that is why we're sitting at 20. So there's a little bit of a battle here. And I don't know ultimately where this is going to close, but it seems like there is a difference of opinion.
Yeah, it's a real interesting game because when you look at Northwestern, obviously this is a team who does things based on scheme, based on recruiting fits, and they're not going to have the same caliber of athletes. It's not, let's call it what it is, as Ohio State. So they need the game to go a certain way and follow a very specific game flow, because It's not the kind of team either that if you get down 28, you think they're going to come storming in through the back door like Indiana was able to do, or front door, I guess, as the case may be, against the Buckeyes, or even a team like Rutgers who got themselves buried and then found a way to only lose by 22 against Ohio State earlier this year. Clearly, we know an Ohio State victory would catapult them into the college football playoff. Should that be the case, Northwestern looking to play spoiler. I'm not quite sure a one-loss Northwestern team, even with a resume-defining and season-defining win over Ohio State, could jump over some of the teams in front of them. So,
right. Let me ask you this.
Keep in mind. Sure.
Watching this, what does Ohio State's offense look like to you? We know they're super talented. We know Ryan Day is a genius schematically. But this Ohio State offense doesn't feel as balanced as last year. Doesn't feel like the O-line is as good as last year. Doesn't feel like the running backs are as good as last year. And while the wideouts are supremely talented, maybe not as polished because a lot of those guys are younger, it doesn't feel like the same dynamic Ohio State offense.
No, I don't think so at all. And I think they're graded from a power rating standpoint to be as elite as what we've seen in the past, but there's no doubt about it that they go as Justin Fields goes. And when you saw some of his more erratic decision making against Indiana, who's arguably the best defense they played, it does give you a little bit of cause for pause. You talk about not having the balanced running threat either. There's no J.K. Dobbins on this roster. Master Teague is a nice piece. Trey Sermon is nice, but they're not Dobbins in terms of giving you that versatility. And once that they get through that first line, you worry about them hitting the home run every time it happens. And while Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are very good, and I think they'll project to be decent players at the next level, it does feel when you watch this Buckeyes team, whether it's inconsistency, whether it's the disruptions in camp, that they haven't hit their stride yet. Now, maybe with 2 weeks to prepare, we'll see a few unique wrinkles. and these guys will look like a well-oiled machine, but it just feels like it's got a hitch in its step more so than what we've seen in the past.
That was my understanding, is if the best defense they've played in Indiana really gave them some troubles early on in that game. And then Ryan Day adjusted and figured things out a little bit. But Northwestern's defense certainly better than Indiana's to this point. So that was part of the value bet. Like, I don't think there's going to be a massive position taken here by anyone. It just feels like nibbles on each sides of the key number. Like, hey, we're going to grab 21. Another person says, hey, we'll lay the 19.5. And that's kind of where we're sitting here in no man's land.
Well, you want to talk about no man's land. I think that's exactly where we are for the Big 12 championship in Arlington right now, with Oklahoma a 5.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game sits at 58.5. And when you look at these two teams, a far cry from the additions that we saw do battle in Ames earlier this year, where Oklahoma goes in as a 7.5-point road favorite, loses the game 37-30, and what was one of the more even football games you're ever going to see. Where Iowa State wins the first down battle 23-22. They finish with a 3-yard advantage from a total offense, 417 to 414. And Oklahoma runs 13 more plays with turnovers being even. When you look at Iowa State, 8-4 against the spread the last 12 times they've caught points, but just 3-9 straight up. Oklahoma, despite all the boo birds that came out early on as Spencer Rattler couldn't pick up where Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts left off before him, still have gone 6-3 against the number. So they've exceeded odds makers' expectations. And when you look at the recent history between these teams, Iowa State's covered 5 straight. 4 of the 5 have gone over the total. But I always think this is important, Payne, because you have to create a little bit of context. And for all those games that Iowa State covered, even earlier this year where they won outright, this will be the first time that they enter a meeting against Oklahoma in recent memory where they're less than a touchdown underdog. So you're going to have to win the football game on the field. Oklahoma, a little bit of revenge. And when you look at these two teams offensively, we know what Brock Purdy and Breece Hall bring to the table. We have an idea of what Spencer Rattler is as he continues to develop, being a young quarterback, but he's got the luxury of a running back in Ramondre Stevenson that's given Oklahoma a different dimension that they lacked early on in the season. I think this game, and I have to imagine you feel the same way, isn't necessarily about which offense will score more. And for all the guys out there going, wait, isn't it always about who scores more? But for the first time in recent memory in the Big 12, it's these two teams actually have the potential to get stops. And I don't mean 1 out of every 5 possessions, but maybe get back-to-back stops and have this thing boil down to defense first and foremost.
A Big 12 championship with a total in the 50s. And it was similar to the Oklahoma State game. A game that was in the high 50s, low 60s, and goes under the number despite some early
shenanigans.
Yeah, some shenanigans.
Nonsense.
I mean, Oklahoma came out with their hair on fire with a good game plan, and then you had some weirdness happen there, with an interception that set up a short field and a penalty that would have led to 3 instead of 7. So when we look at these games, I think everyone will look at them from a little bit of a same perspective. So we try to branch out and cover something that most people won't talk about this week. And you're going to get 2 potential NFL quarterbacks here in Spencer Rattler and Brock Purdy, and that's what everyone's tuning in for. And it's, the Big 12 and fireworks with Lincoln Riley. I think for us, the game comes down to which defense is going to get a few of these key stops and which defense is truly improved. We know both right now, the Cyclones and Sooners, they are trending significantly better defensively than when they met the first time back in October. Which of these defenses, has, I guess, solved some of the question marks and concerns that they've had? Ultimately, defense, despite what that score says, won the first matchup. Because Iowa State in that first matchup, they went in. They made the halftime adjustments. They held OU to 4.2 yards per play in the second half. So despite 67 points on the board, it was defense that I believe won the game the first time, with Matt Campbell being able to go in at halftime and figure out what was going on and make those adjustments and held OU in check in that second half. Looking at it this time, Oklahoma has got to figure out how to slow Breece Hall down, obviously, right? Iowa State was able to run the ball pretty efficiently down to down in the first meeting, 57% success rate. Breece Hall averaged 5 yards a carry. Oklahoma was then forced at that point to load the box. And looking at some of the numbers, Purdy wasn't overly efficient throwing in that game, but because he saw single coverage all night, Purdy was able to hit a few explosives. He only completed 50% of his passes, but averaged almost 11 yards per attempt because of those explosives with everyone focused on Breece Hall. So now if you fast forward a little bit and look at some of these trending metrics, it is clear Alex Grinch has Oklahoma's defense playing much better than the version that Iowa State played back in October. You look right now, Oklahoma's defense, 6th in line yards, 3rd in stuff rate for the entire season, 35% of runs of grade successful, 12th in overall EPA per rush allowed. So if Alex Grinch can contain Breece Hall without having to play, 8, 9 guys in the box this time, I'm not sure it's overly close. And for Iowa State's defense, and Todd, you put me onto this. You watch all these damn games, every damn college football game's on your television on a Saturday.
Well, yeah, the last 2 weeks, though, full disclosure, I wanted to bang my head through the TV set, especially watching Wisconsin attempt to move the football in Iowa City.
Nothing like a second and long handoff to the fullback.
Knowing that your quarterback can only throw a 4-yard out pattern to your 6-team wide receivers. But I'm not bitter, Payne. I'm not bitter. I've put that loss in the rearview mirror.
Missed some open guys there, without question. So, what you kind of put me onto, and then what I tried to watch in a couple games, and then you looking metrically, I'm not sure the Cyclones have the horses outside. And again, with this matchup, Spencer Rattler's probably grown up some. That was his first ever road start at Iowa State. If you look at where the Cyclones have had issues, it is in the secondary, 41st in passing success rate defense, 41st in explosive pass defense, 49th in EPA pass defense. We've seen the Cyclones struggle with speed deep at times, especially when they step up in class. And I know they go out there and beat Texas, but they gave up some explosives in that game as well. And aside from Rattler probably growing up a little more since the first meeting, he's going to have a far more balanced offense because Marvin Mims, he looks like the real deal. That was his first start as a freshman receiver going out there on the road. His role's expanded since the last time these guys have met. Stevenson, you mentioned at the top, the Sooners' best running back, didn't play in that game. So suddenly you have this Sooners offense that is more balanced with the ground game, should open up the pass offense. Stevenson's averaging almost 6 yards a carry since he's returned. So to me, this game is going to come down to which defense can get stops, and based on how these defenses are trending and the upgrades OU has on offense this time versus last, it's hard not to see value in the Sooners, Todd. I mean, we love Matt Campbell in Iowa State probably more than most, but you're looking at a number in this matchup on a neutral with added weapons, with the incentive of revenge for the first time. It's a shorter number than the number that was in Ames. So that's what's interesting to me here.
This is the only matchup in the Big 12, and I know Iowa State has had a ton of success covering, as we outlined at the top of our breakdown here, where Matt Campbell, in my opinion, doesn't have a massive advantage over the man he's matching wits with on the opposing sideline. You have to imagine Lincoln Riley hasn't had a ton of opportunity to go out there and get a do-over of sorts within the league. Against Texas is normally the team that Oklahoma will double up against. But knowing that a lot of the things you outlined there, that Oklahoma does have horses, they have better athletes, they're able to scheme differently. The one thing that I took away from watching that Iowa State game in its entirety against Texas is that Texas was able to develop enough route concepts where they had one-on-one matchups downfield against Iowa State. And while Oklahoma doesn't quite run the same offense, Iowa State, in my opinion, doesn't have to pay nearly as much attention to Spencer Rattler being a consistent run threat. He did show some of that ability with his legs against Oklahoma State to at least force the Cowboys in that game to stay honest in terms of respecting his run ability. And if they're able to get man coverage on the outside, I just don't know if Iowa State has the horses to slow down Oklahoma should Rattler be able to take the next step. As you outlined, this isn't his first road game or his first rodeo. Suddenly that meltdown against Kansas State and the loss against Iowa State are very much in the rear view. And while I'm not taking anything away from Iowa State and what they've done, this is still a defense that's given up points in bunches, albeit with the exceptions, not West Virginia and Kansas State. Baylor was able to move the football on them. There were a couple other teams that were able to do so. I just think it's an interesting game as much with the number, knowing that people gravitate towards Iowa State as an underdog, especially knowing they have a giant target on their back. with the very real possibility they get a little help being number 6 in the college football playoff, almost a win and you're in type mentality should there be chaos with the top 4.
It'll be interesting to see where this line settles. So from our perspective, again, you're looking at this line of 5.5, kind of a bit of a dead zone in college. And you're saying, my God, Oklahoma laid 7.5 in Ames. Now you have the ability of having Spencer Rattler and Mims, a little bit more seasoned, Stevenson, their best running back, returning. It would appear that there's value. Now, I try to look at a bunch of power numbers. We make our own. The guys I speak with make their own. And you try to figure out where this market could potentially head. My understanding is that we might see some money on Oklahoma. However, you're going to have some of the math guys, if this gets to 7, play Iowa State back just out of principle, because I'm looking at some of these other numbers, whether it's the S&P Plus stuff or it's Sager, and like they're all significantly lower. They're making this game 4. I just don't see that. But hey, if we all had the same opinion, we'd be doing things a little differently, I would guess.
Yeah, and that being the case, the market would only move in one direction. The total is interesting. As you mentioned, did open as high as 59, number trending down. Curious to see where this number ultimately settles, given some of the creativity early on and how good these two teams have been in terms of making their opponents one-dimensional, selling out to stop the run. And if that's the case, I think advantage Oklahoma if they're able to at least neutralize the effectiveness of Breece Hall. But either way, quite a bit of intrigue. We know Iowa State trying to nail down its elusive first conference championship since, I believe, before 1920. So a lot to be excited about in Ames, given what Matt Campbell has built. And then ultimately it becomes the coaching carousel where Iowa State fans stay glued to social media, hoping that Matt Campbell won't take a higher profile job somewhere else in the country, which I think will be a rinse and repeat type mentality until his dream job ultimately comes available. So
something has to open up there in the Big Ten, I think.
You would think, but
that's my understanding. Well, I'll just put it out there. So the boosters offered at Florida State, and I get Florida State isn't in the best position right now, but my understanding is he doesn't want to be in the South. So he really likes Iowa State. It would have to be probably a move for a big-time program somewhere in the North, is what I'm hearing.
If you look at some of the stuff that's there, I don't think if you're Illinois, you obviously have to make a call to Matt Campbell, ask him how much money he wants to come into the Big Ten, right?
You make the call, but I think his people nicely say not interested. I don't think you actually. I don't think you're getting quite in touch with Matt. I think his people will nicely decline, but I could be completely wrong, right? The numbers, the money could just be off the charts to lure him elsewhere. But if all things are semi-equal, his people have indicated that he wants something in the North. So,
hey, the program's been good to him. He's accomplished an awful lot in a place that a lot of folks have said how difficult it is to win in the Big 12, doing more with less every year. Lifelong podcast listeners know exactly how we feel about Campbell, and it's great to see him having Iowa State on the cusp of not only a conference championship, but if things were to break it the right way, maybe even an entrant into the college football playoff. From a program still on the up and coming to a program that has already arrived, and these two teams seem to be very much entrenched in the college football playoff already. There is, of course, a chance that if Clemson were to blow out Notre Dame, that maybe the Irish are on the outside looking in, or on the flip side, we know that if Notre Dame knocks off Clemson, snagging the season sweep, that the Tigers will be relegated to a second-tier bowl game. But when you look at this number here, there's a reason Clemson is a 10.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game sits at 60.5. The line closed Clemson minus 5.5 for the first game. This one, when we talked to John Sheeran a few weeks ago, they intended to open Clemson right around a 7.5-point favorite. That number has leaked through 10. A storyline to keep in mind, Clark Lee, the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame, has moved on to, I'm not going to call him greener pastures, has moved on to a different locale to take over as head coach of Vanderbilt. He's got a heap of challenges coming in there, at least the academics very much in line in terms of what he's dealing with at Notre Dame. when you look at the first meeting, Payne, Clemson threw for 439 yards, 29 of 44 for more than 10 yards per pass. That, of course, was without Trevor Lawrence, as DJ Ungalele was the man leading the charge.
Good for you, by the way.
I don't think that's even right, but I just figured I'd hit it and I'd move on from there. Because if the pronunciation wasn't right, trust me, our loyal listeners will call me out on social media.
The old college recipe there. Good for you.
Yeah. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish were extremely successful in neutralizing Travis Etienne. Clemson ran the ball 34 times for 33 yards, 1 yard per rush. And the reason I bring that up is because we saw Notre Dame employ a very similar philosophy for their win in Chapel Hill, where they took away one element of what North Carolina wanted to do. And you read some of the comments that Brian Kelly has said all week that, hey, look, when you play a dynamic offense, you have to take away something that they do. And at least if we take away the run game, we can make and at least try and control down and distance on third down. But Clemson did have success in that passing game. Mari Rogers, Cornell Powell went bonkers for combining for 295 yards. You have to think that Travis Etienne will be a bigger part here. But enter Trevor Lawrence and a chance to put Notre Dame's secondary on its heels, something that no team has really done from start to finish all season. When you look at Clemson and the way they have to scheme the second time around, Payne, how will they go about attacking that Irish pass defense?
You know, we broke this game down back in November. I think we even followed it up with a recap after the fact. And digging back in this week, my thoughts haven't changed, especially knowing Clemson and Notre Dame have been on this pretty obvious collision course for a rematch. This time it's with Trevor Lawrence. And I remember saying in that recap, Todd, like how disappointed I was with Clemson's offensive coordinator, Tony Elliott. And I get it. I understand it. When you have this special player like Travis Etienne, you have to give him the ball. But I think it's important how you get him the ball. And I kind of liken this to the increase of teams going for it in the NFL on fourth down, right? It's like, it's great you're going for it. That's the first step. But the fullback dive on 4th and 1.5 isn't good. So, getting Travis Etienne the ball is good. Getting it to him creatively is better. And so the strength of Notre Dame's defense is clearly their front seven. The questions we've had about the Irish defense all season, it's been the secondary. So when you see Etienne going for 1.6 a carry like he did in the first matchup, and you have a young quarterback like DJ who's averaging almost 9.3 yards per pass, it would seem like the smart thing to do there would be to pass more. And that trust wasn't quite there throughout the game. I think it's crucial to get Etienne the ball out of the backfield. Get him going as a receiver, which in the second half, Tony Elliott did a better job of. But for Clemson, like this is an upgrade, right? This isn't DJ passing the ball in his first road start. This is Trevor Lawrence, the number one pick on a neutral in a situation that he's been in before. And you mentioned Clark Lee. His job at this point, right, prior to this game in the first matchup, it's like, hey, put this Mona Lisa together, put it on film, and then go get a coaching job. Clark Lee is now the head coach of Vandy. He's spent time interviewing and traveling and now putting his staff together during the time that you would be preparing for this game. So this will be interesting to see who makes the adjustments. And so when I look at this, I think the rematch is all about a potential curveball. This is, not to be cliche, this is round 13 of the fight. When your opponent knows you like the back of your hand, what counter can you pull out? So the key factor to me is Clark Lee's Notre Dame secondary. How do they choose to defend Clemson's pass game? In the first game, in these known passing situations, Notre Dame wasn't able to get to the quarterback at their normal rate. So Clemson had some question marks with their offensive line. They did a good job in known passing situations keeping DJ clean. And if you look, it allowed him to have 11 passes of 15 or more yards, 7 passes of 20 or more yards. Notre Dame on the season, 40th in explosive pass defense. We have said all along that you can make plays on Notre Dame's defense over the top. And the concerning part about that is, forget the game against Clemson. Remove them from the equation. The 9 other games Notre Dame has played, the average passing EPA of those opponents, 84th in the country. Notre Dame's managed to face 5 offenses that rank 107th or worse in EPA per pass this season. A 6th offense in Pittsburgh that ranks 83rd in EPA per pass, and Clemson didn't see Pickett They got Joey Yellen. So they have not faced a quarterback on the same planet as Trevor Lawrence, and I get that most quarterbacks aren't Trevor Lawrence, but I mean, they haven't come close. The other thing that's a little concerning for as great as Notre Dame's front seven is they're 70th in explosive run defense. So you wonder if Tony Elliott, knowing Notre Dame can give up chunk plays, tries to get NTN past the first level of the defense, right? Line him up in the slot. Get him going in the screen game. Let his speed wreak havoc in open space underneath, and then let his talent turn them into explosives. Plus, if you have to pay attention to NEN underneath as a pass catcher, it's only going to open up things in the deep pass game. So I don't think Clemson's going to have much trouble moving the ball here. I really don't. They didn't in the first game in a tricky situation. So I don't see Trevor Lawrence being stopped here or this offense. And I think the receiver group, while it's not as dynamic for Clemson as it has been in years past, I think it's healthier right now than it has been at any point this season.
We say it all the time, Payne, and when you look at a number like this, I think the casual fan out there goes, wow, this number is massive. Every number tells a story as far as this business is concerned, and when you look at ESPN and their football playoff predictive indicator, whatever the hell they call it, saying that Clemson has a 45% chance to get into the playoff, yet you calculate out implied probability, and for rounding purposes, we'll say that odds makers believe Clemson wins this game 80% of the time. Does this just speak more to the separation between the haves and have-nots, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, and the Ohio States, even before we dropped down to Notre Dame, who we've had power rated inside the top 5 for Bet the Board all season long?
You know, numbers do paint a picture, and it's pretty telling that this line is 10.5, and without looking at bet splits, which I don't think have a ton of value, but probably are a little bit better of an indicator in big games with the largest volume, I would assume it's not, it's going to be tough for recreational bettors to process, like Notre Dame won by 7 outright the first game, only getting 4.5. Now it's like I can get 10.5 on a neutral. So I think that probably becomes a little bit more appealing. Now I will say this, even in the blowout in the playoff a couple years back, Notre Dame was at least able to hang on early before eventually just getting blown out of that game. I like this Notre Dame team more than most too. Like I've been a believer in Ian Book, and Ian Book had an absolutely fantastic game the first go round. I think he accounted for almost 400 yards himself between throwing and using his legs. My gut says though that Venables, who's 100% focused on this game, has a better opportunity to make the adjustments. That's just my gut feeling here. Now, I'm not running to lay the 10, the 10.5, or the 11, and I think we'll probably see this line not change too far from this number. But I just don't see much in it at this price. But it's certainly, I think the public will end up being on Notre Dame plus the points here.
One other thing to keep in mind, too, when you begin to handicap this one, Clemson gets 3 defensive starters back for this matchup that they didn't have the first time around either, and Davis Skalski and Mike Jones. So that definitely gives Venables, as you alluded to there, a little bit more flexibility to scheme things up and change the way that they take away what Notre Dame wants to do. And when you look at this Irish team, they've been very good running the football all season long. I do have some questions about some of their athletes in space. Obviously better than Northwestern, but there is no Chase Claypool on the outside. There is no Cole Kmet, so you don't quite have those game breakers if Clemson's able to make the Fighting Irish one-dimensional.
That was something we broke down in the first game. And to Notre Dame's credit, they did enough schematically to open some things up in the pass game. And Clemson's a little young in the secondary, but they've made some adjustments, and I think that's ultimately what this game will come down to, is both of these teams have seen each other's 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Which team can come and deliver the curveball here? And I think that's ultimately what's going to decide this game in terms of who covers it. I don't see a situation where Notre Dame's going to win this game, but in terms of the number here, which team can make that adjustment will ultimately decide who covers this number.
Well, and even the best hitters in Major League Baseball can get their timing down and hit a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. But if there's some late movement, or if you have the Clayton Kershaw 12-6 curveball, a little bit different if you expect that in a hitter's count.
That comparison's back now that he's got a ring. I love it.
The weight is
putting a little
lifted
more
off his
respect
shoulders.
on his name.
as there should be, one of the best pitchers of our generation that now no longer has to walk around with the stigma, the best pitcher without a World Series championship. So good for Clayton to try and achieve those goals. All right, on to the American Athletic. And Payne, I don't think we have to spend a ton of time on this particular game, where Cincinnati puts its undefeated record on the line against the Tulsa Golden Hurricane, a game that we actually used as a best bet earlier this season when Cincinnati went on the road at Tulsa. The game wasn't actually played. The rematch, or whatever you want to call it, the reschedule game, that wasn't actually played. And so third time's a charm in the conference championship. Total in this game, 45.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. And I think anybody who's handicapped this game or watched these two teams at all this season begins to go, wonder where the offense potentially comes from in this matchup, as we know both of these teams are a little bit stouter on the defensive side. And for those folks who want to laud Cincinnati and all the steps forward that Desmond Ridder has made so far this year with some of the big crooked numbers they're putting up, Cincinnati hasn't exactly faced the most daunting schedule of opposing defenses when you dive into the list of American Athletic Conference opponents.
No, he has not. And Tulsa's probably going to be the better defense that Cincinnati has played. Now, for me, I think the key to this game is obviously Tulsa starting quickly. Take advantage of a Cincinnati team that hasn't played in 28 days, and maybe game speed is a little foreign to them early. But I think Tulsa has got to get out of the gates to have a chance here. Past that, to me, it's going to be on Tulsa's offense to do enough. And I'm sure there's people saying, Tulsa's defense is their calling card, no doubt. But I think that's probably a prerequisite for Tulsa to even have a fighting chance here. If you're considering Tulsa, you have to know their defense shows up. The key past that is Tulsa's offense contributing. And it's not just putting points on the board. I think it's by not making the defense's job tougher by turning it over or setting up some short fields. Going 3 and out in 37 seconds and not allowing your defense to catch a breath like that's a problem. And so, to me, it's probably going to be a little bit of an uphill battle for Tulsa's offense. Right now, 90th in offensive success rate. They have a world of trouble running the ball down to down. Just 39% of their rush attempts have graded successful. That's 95th in the country. So the idea of maybe taking the air out of this game, probably a little far-fetched. Tulsa's O-line struggles to get push up front. 84th in line yards. Almost 20% of Tulsa's runs get stopped at or behind the line of scrimmage. Tulsa isn't good throwing it either, but the best part of their offense is Zach Smith throwing it. Tulsa's 52nd EPA per pass. They've shown an ability to hit some explosives, 49th in explosive passing for Tulsa. Candidly, though, Cincinnati's number 2 in the country in passing success rate defense. It's their strength. We've said anytime we've talked Cincy, the toughest teams on their schedule, they match up really well against. It's because of this pass defense. Tulsa is going to have to figure out a way here to scheme something up. A couple trick plays, a couple reverses, a couple throwbacks, whatever it is. You're going to have to take a few shots. But the key here is don't turn it over, right? To me, a solid offensive possession for Tulsa is picking up a few first downs, handing it over to your punter, and play the field position game. And listen, if you don't throw up on yourself offensively for Tulsa, picking up a first down or two and then having your Ray Guy Award list punter boom it deep, that's not a bad strategy to me. And if you go back to the UCF game in Orlando, Tulsa wins outright as a dog. Their punter pinned UCF inside their 10 4 times. Wilson changed field position on a few other punts as well. He boomed one almost 70 yards, flipped the entire field. I think that's going to be important here. So starting quickly is vital, right? Don't make mistakes either or put your defense in a bad position. Play clean. Let your punter help you in the field position battle game. And you'll have a chance, I think, to grind this game out and potentially cover. My feeling is maybe, or what I'm at least hearing, that is if Tulsa's going to be the side, maybe a little bit more comfortable doing it in the first half. But certainly this number has seen quite the adjustment since the first time we considered taking Tulsa, Todd.
You know, what's interesting about that is you talk about the layoff for Cincinnati. The last game they played November 21st against Central Florida. In that game, they had a hold on late. And for those folks that actually laid the points with the Bearcats, weren't happy with the end game sequence, allowing the Bearcats to get out of Orlando with a 36-33 win. Defensively, Cincinnati held UCF to 200 yards below their season average. You mentioned how good their secondary is, and I don't think it's truly going to be tested by Tulsa. But at the same time, Tulsa getting off to a fast start we know is of the utmost importance. The problem for the Golden Hurricane, they've scored 21 touchdowns this season, Payne. A grand total of 6 of them, 6, have come in the first half. So a quick start for them in the first half might mean trying to get to the break with 10 points, hoping that the Bearcats just can't maintain any of that offensive continuity or the quick hit ability that we've seen from time to time from them against inferior defenses so far this season.
Hey, I got to tell you, 10-10 in the first half would make a lot of people happy. 10-3 in the first half would make a lot of people happy.
There is no doubt about that whatsoever as you begin to break this game down that it could be poised for a defensive slugfest. But at the same time, Saturday evening, you will have a game taking place in Atlanta that I think the entire college football world would be stunned if it was a defensive slugfest. That, of course, being the SEC title game, pitting the Alabama Crimson Tide, the number 1 overall team in the college football playoff rankings, against the Florida Gators. And Alabama has ballooned out to a massive 17.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game sits at 73.5. Alabama trying to become only the second team under Nick Saban's leadership to finish undefeated. You have to go back 11 years to find the last Crimson Tide team to accomplish this feat. That group pretty much beat everybody in their path, winning games by 20 plus, yada, yada, yada. When you look at Alabama, recent title game history, I was surprised that this is actually Alabama's only their second trip to the SEC title game since 2016, since it feels like they're there every year, but Auburn and LSU have actually had a seat at the table. When you look at the Florida Gators, Payne, there's no doubt that their season kind of bottomed out last weekend at home against the LSU Tigers, losing outright as more than a 3-touchdown favorite. Poor decision-making, to say the least, from Marco Wilson, tossing a shoe that ultimately led to Cade York's game-winning field goal. But you look at this number, and Florida, when we talked to John Sheeran of FanDuel...
shoe? Honestly.
This number would have been 10.5 2 weeks ago. Suddenly the market has taken off, and it doesn't appear early on that the books are able to get a single ticket on the Florida Gators, if my CBS colleagues are any indication for the way that they're breaking this game down. But you look at it, and let's not kid ourselves. Florida, 1-2 stops max. Does Florida have enough in the passing game to allow them to cover as a 17.5-point pot?
They're going to need to, because it's going to be tough for Florida to get stops. When you're looking at Alabama's offense, it's the most efficient in the country. They're also number 1 in overall success rate, number 2 in EPA per play. This is really, a dynamic Alabama offense that is led by Mac Jones and pretty balanced ground game. So Florida is going to struggle defensively. And just because you're looking at this unit right now outside the top 75 in both EPA per rush and pass allowed for the Gators. So the clear key to this is Florida's offense. If Kyle Trask and Dan Mullen are planning to stay within the 17-point spread, it's got to be because of the offense. It's because Kyle Trask has a Heisman-like day. While I think it's better than last season, Florida still doesn't have a ton of balance to their ground game. And I think if you're looking at Trask and you think about him moving the ball efficiently, he's done a very good job, and they've been pretty explosive as well. But the key to this is it's finishing drives in the money zone, something that Florida couldn't do last week. You look at that game against LSU, sure, I don't think they were, let's just say, fully motivated for some reason. They weren't all the way there. They were looking ahead a little bit to Alabama. But the key to them losing that game was 10 trips inside the LSU 40. Florida has 2.7 points per opportunity in that game. So that's just not going to get it done. If Florida's offense is, to me, on its A game here, they're going to have a decent shot to hang some points. And I think that's really what we're looking for here. If you are looking right now at what the Florida Gators have done offensively, they've been pretty fantastic. And I think when you're looking at things right now, 5th in passing success rate, top 5 in explosive passing offense, top 5 in EPA per pass, despite some of the improvements that you're going to see from Alabama's defense or hear about this week, I think Florida's going to be able to move the ball here. And even with some of those adjustments that Alabama's made, you're still looking at Saban right now, 28th in passing success rate defense, 26th in explosive pass defense, 33rd in EPA pass defense. A lot of these adjustments that Saban has made has come at halftime, and it's against inferior opponents. So give Saban all the credit in the world. But to me, this specific defense doesn't have like the typical horses we've grown accustomed to, my opinion, to improve this much without there being other reasons for the improvement. And to me, I think it's partly Alabama's schedule. I mean, I'm looking at this, and if you remember, Todd, go back to the beginning portion of the year. A lot of people were concerned about Alabama's defense leading into the Georgia game. And
correct.
Right, that was what the mindset I thought was. That's what I remember hearing people discuss that week. And you look, the first 3 games of the season, Alabama plays Missouri, A&M, and Ole Miss. Those 3 teams all rank 35th or better in passing EPA. Suddenly, like Nick Saban's waved this magic wand, people want to believe, and the defense is elite again. I'm not saying they have not improved, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the improvement for Alabama's defense happens when the schedule of offenses decreases. So if you remove the first 3 weeks and just look at the last 7 games where this defensive improvement has really taken shape for Alabama, they faced offenses with an average passing EPA rank of 76. Not a single offense over that stretch with a passing offense that ranks inside the top 45 in passing EPA. 5 of the 7 offenses are outside the top 50. 3 of them outside the top 95. So it's going to be a little bit different here, obviously. And in Florida, looks like they're going to get Pitts back. I don't have a horse in the race, Todd, but I mean, you kind of mentioned this. Just 14 days ago, everyone's projecting this spread to be in the 11 to 13 range. We've now blown through some important numbers here of 14 and 17. We're looking at pretty much a consensus 17 and a half. I don't make a 6-point adjustment in the last 3 weeks, although it was a touch higher than I think the initial 10.5 you mentioned that FanDuel was going to set there. Obviously, Kyle Pitts is back. I think that's going to be a fun game within the game, is how does Alabama elect to cover him? Dylan Moses has been pretty good in coverage, allowing 0.65 yards per coverage snap, and quarterbacks have a 76 rating when targeting Dylan Moses, but I don't think you can have a linebacker cover Pitts consistently down to down. Just speculating here, but I would assume Patrick Surtain Jr. is going to have the task of shutting down Tony. And if he can do that, then Saban probably takes a page out of his buddy Belichick's book and brackets and doubles Kyle Pitts. That would be my guess.
I mean, you're going to have to take away one of Florida's primary receiving options. You mentioned Kyle Pitts. You talked about how ineffective they were in the green zone. You have to think that those numbers are significantly better if Pitts isn't a healthy scratch. Still one of the more, honestly, bizarre storylines of the entire college football season, because you have to think if Florida believed they were going to beat LSU, which obviously they did, if the game was a 7-point spread or something along those lines, Pitts probably is out there against LSU. We're not having this discussion. It's ultimately a decision that Dan Mullen, along with the rest of the Florida coaching staff, has to live with. You hope that they're looking out for the players' best interest. But now the Gators a little bit up against it. And I think, so much of this, Payne, when you look at the way that the storyline has played out for Alabama, they're 8-2 against the spread this year, so books know that they're going to get an inordinate amount of support. And going through some of the early indications, and we'll get John's take to see if FanDuel is showing similar betting trends, but it looks like 85% of the tickets early on are coming in on the Alabama Crimson Tide in this game. And let's make comparisons, which is always dangerous to do, but that's never stopped me before. Alabama on the road against Arkansas lays... No, it has not. Alabama lays 28 last week on a closing number against Arkansas. That game, mind you, was bet down from 31 to 28 because we didn't know what Alabama had to do. They started a little slow, find some separation. When Florida played Arkansas in their own building, it was a game where there was public support on the underdog there. Florida closed right around an 18-point favorite. And so you're talking about that in and of itself. Let's call it with home field advantage in that 12 to 13 range. Suddenly, you can't buy a Florida dollar anywhere in the market because they come in on a loss. I'm not quite sure if I fully sign off on that. I, much like you, have not bet this game yet. But the longer this goes on, the more I dig into it. It'd be nice to actually have an underdog with firepower to know that the back door could be open if Florida couldn't stay competitive from start to finish.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are... What's really wild to me is Alabama is obviously very good here, But it's just funny to me because we break down Alabama's defense, and again, I believe that they have made improvements throughout the course of the season, but some of the colleagues and I guess some of the other talking heads are saying this is going to be a runaway for Alabama. Well, those are the same people that you sent me a straw poll don't believe Mac Jones is deserving because I think he's a game manager, and yet I'm telling you the defense probably isn't as improved as what some of the numbers indicate. So it makes it difficult for me to comprehend how they love Alabama with those two key factors there. I just think we've seen quite the adjustment here. You would think Dan Mullen offensively is savvy enough to figure some things out to stay within the 17.5. And obviously, you have a total that is continuing to tick up. So I don't know how many stops Florida is going to get defensively. I don't think many. But we have seen Florida against even what I would project as a better defense against Georgia just chew them up on a track that isn't as fast or wasn't as fast, and there was a touch of weather in that game. So, I think Florida, after last week, this was the game that they were focused on, going to get Kyle Pitts back, is going to have some success moving this ball. I truly believe it.
Yeah, when you look at Florida's recent results, yes, I know they haven't scored more than 34 points in any of their last 3 games, but against Kentucky, Tennessee, and LSU, hey, the LSU game, I think got a little squirrely for them just because they couldn't get off the field, and without Kyle Pitts, the dynamic changed, and we see it all the time. Sometimes you don't show up, you can't just flip a switch when one team you think is left for dead, and credit to LSU for putting together their best effort of the season, costing Florida most likely a seat at the table in the college football playoff, no longer being able to, at least in my opinion, win and get in like we thought that narrative would have been coming into the championship. Conference championship games broken down as eloquently, as in-depth as we possibly can without taking 6 hours of your time. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You, of course, can follow me there on Twitter as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, just in time for championship weekend, FanDuel wants to add a little bit of excitement to your sports watching experience by allowing you to bet on all the action by downloading the app. There's a reason why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. The app is simple to use, great odds, all different betting markets, unique fun bet types, not just for college football on Championship Saturday, but all your college basketball, your NFL, hopefully my beloved NHL, no idea if it'll actually start. The NBA is right around the corner. You name it, it's all right there for you. And we have a very special offer that we encourage you to take advantage of. Go to FanDuel.com/bettheboard. $1,000 risk-free sign-up bonus. Take full advantage. Double your bankroll. Put it to good use. We'll be in business from now through at least the Super Bowl, trying to put more football winners on the docket. But speaking of winners, Payne, and we've unfortunately been a bit easy for me to say, a little bit lean in this department. Where do we find an investment opportunity this championship Saturday?
Let's go the game we've already broken down into the Big 12. Let's go with the Oklahoma Sooners minus the points, 5.5, 5. That seems to be the readily available number. We'll lay it with Oklahoma. If you're just listening for the best bet, rewind to the back. It'll be time-stamped. We broke this game down, spent about 10 minutes on it. And ultimately, I just think Oklahoma's better positioned here with the talent on offense growing, getting guys like Stevenson back in the fold, and I think Alex Grinch's defense will have made the necessary adjustments, and they've improved vastly since that October matchup. So, Oklahoma Sooners minus the points, 5.5, 5, whichever you can get. And let's get to the window in the final college football podcast of the season.
Spencer Rattler, Lincoln Riley, take us to the promised land, my friend. Do want to thank all of you, our loyal listeners, who have been with us on this bumpy journey throughout college football. We know that navigating through a COVID season has been a challenge on a variety of fronts. We weren't sure we were going to get the season. We've had games canceled. We've had players ruled out on game day. I appreciate all of you guys continuing to listen from start to finish as we put a bow on the final college football podcast of this 2020 season. Payne, anything else that you'd like to share with the loyal listeners before we take a 24-hour break and reconvene with a little National Football League tomorrow? No,
back tomorrow with the NFL. We will obviously break down the playoff games in college football, but we'll include those in the NFL podcast since I think that's probably the best way to break some of those games down, include them in the NFL. So this is it. Let's wrap it up. Final college standalone podcast of the season.
And I may try and push for a New Year's Six game or two, but that'll be a negotiation that takes place off the air. For Payne Insider, you can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And come Saturday, early afternoon with an Oklahoma ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.